Imagine waking up one day to find that everything you thought you knew about your life, your identity, and even the world around you is built upon a lie, one that you've been complicit in creating. The images you see, the thoughts you have, and the emotions that seem to control your every action are all, in some way, products of a force so subtle, yet so powerful that it shapes every interaction, every decision, and every belief you hold dear. Now, take a deep breath and realize this. What if the words you speak, the very language you use, are silently constructing the reality in which you live? Every sentence you utter, every thought you form, is not just a reflection of your mind, but an architect of the world you experience. Think about it. You're walking down the street. The sun is shining. People are busy, moving quickly, each in their own bubble of thought. Yet, with every word you hear, with every conversation you overhear, an invisible shift takes place in your perception. One comment, one casual phrase, can alter your mood, your interpretation of the situation, even your sense of self. It's almost as if the world you see around you is constantly being rewritten by language itself. The idea is unsettling, isn't it? Because if language is so powerful, then that means the reality you've built for yourself, with all its fears, insecurities, and limitations, might not even be real. It might just be an illusion, crafted by the very words you've learned to use without a second thought. Here's the paradox. You've spent your entire life thinking that words are simply tools for communication, harmless and neutral. But what if they're far more insidious than that? What if words are not just a reflection of thought, but the very fabric of thought itself? Consider this. You wake up feeling tired. That one word sets the tone for your entire day. You feel sluggish, demotivated. The word tired carries a hidden weight. It convinces you that your body is incapable of more, that your energy is finite, that the day ahead will be a struggle. But what if, instead of telling yourself that you're tired, you told yourself you're resting? What would change? Would you still feel the same heaviness? Or would you begin to feel more energized, more capable of taking on what comes your way? It's not just an idle thought experiment. This is the power of language in action. The words you use aren't merely describing your reality, they are creating it. Each word is like a small command, influencing not just your mind but your very body, your interactions, and the way you experience the world. Let that sink in for a moment. How many of your limitations, your anxieties, your doubts, your fears are the result of words you've internalized without question? What if you've been given the wrong set of instructions for living without even realizing it? You might already be asking yourself, but isn't language just a mirror of our thoughts? Doesn't it just reflect what we already believe? This is the conventional view, and it's one that's hard to shake. We've been taught that words are merely vessels for our inner dialogue, that they only represent what's already in our minds. But there's something far more insidious at play, because when you examine it closely, you realize that language doesn't just reflect thought, it shapes thought. It filters reality through a particular lens, often so subtly that we don't notice it. Words create categories, define limits, and build narratives. Even your sense of self, your identity, is the product of words that have been drilled into your mind since childhood. I am a failure. I'm not good enough. I'll never make it. These are just a few examples of the many labels that shape your worldview and influence your decisions. And the most dangerous part, they're all based on nothing more than words. But the stakes are even higher than this. Think about how societal structures rely on language to maintain control. What happens when entire populations are convinced that certain words have absolute, unshakable meaning? Words like success, failure, love, wealth, happiness. These terms have been so deeply ingrained in our collective psyche that we don't question their definitions anymore. And yet, each of these words carries an entire belief system, one that dictates how we live, how we interact with others, and what we deem worthy of pursuit. What if these words, the ones we take for granted, are part of a larger social construct designed to keep us in line, to reinforce certain ideologies, and to ensure that we stay locked in the same patterns? The idea of success, for example, may seem like an innocent goal. But what if success is a construct created to make us perpetually dissatisfied, always striving for something that's just out of reach? And then there's the ultimate question: can we ever escape this web of language? If our entire reality is built upon words, is it even possible to see the world as it truly is, beyond the veil of language? In this moment, you stand at the edge of a profound realization. You can feel the tension mounting, the questions piling up. What if the words you've used to define yourself, your identity, your life, your purpose are not just reflections of your mind, but the chains that bind you to a version of reality that you can't escape. What if you've been living inside a linguistic prison, unknowingly imprisoned by your own thoughts and the words that gave them life? The paradox here is both chilling and liberating. Words shape your reality, but they also hold the key to freeing you from it. You've been given a tool so powerful that it can trap you, or it can set you free. The next step, however, is not simply to acknowledge this truth, but to understand why it exists in the first place. Why does language wield this kind of power? And more importantly, how did we allow it to go unnoticed for so long? To answer these questions, we must look deeper into the roots of language, psychology, and society itself. And perhaps, just perhaps, we'll uncover something that can forever alter the way we live and perceive the world. If words can shape reality, the question arises, why have we allowed them to do so? To begin to unravel this mystery, we must turn inward into the recesses of our minds and the history of human thought. To understand the hidden power of language, we need to confront its psychological and philosophical roots, where our assumptions about reality, identity, and communication first began to take shape. Let's start with a question that might unsettle you. What if everything you've been told about yourself, the very ideas that make you you, were not truly your own? What if your sense of identity, your values, your fears, even your desires, are merely echoes of others' words, beliefs, and expectations? This idea is not new. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, argued that much of our behavior is driven by unconscious forces, many of which are rooted in language and societal conditioning. Jung's concept of the shadow refers to the parts of the psyche that we repress because they don't fit into the socially acceptable narrative we've been taught to live by. These parts of the self, often filled with untapped potential, are suppressed through language and societal expectations. By repressing aspects of ourselves that don't conform to cultural norms, we learn to speak and think in ways that align with external expectations, leaving us disconnected from our true nature. But this repression doesn't just affect individuals, it affects entire societies. As Jung suggested, much of the collective unconscious, the shared pool of symbols, myths, and beliefs that influence a culture functions through language. The words we use in everyday life, like success, love, duty, and purpose, have all been imbued with centuries of collective meaning. And because these meanings are so deeply ingrained, we rarely stop to question them. Consider the word success. In Western culture, success is almost universally tied to wealth, status, and external achievement. But what if this definition of success is not a natural or personal one, but a societal construct? What if, in the pursuit of success as defined by society, we've been led to ignore the deeper, more meaningful aspects of our existence? The relentless focus on external markers of success creates a reality where inner fulfillment and emotional well-being take a backseat to the pursuit of material gain. Friedrich Nietzsche, the German philosopher, took this critique even further. He argued that the dominant moral systems in society, especially those rooted in religion and cultural expectations, have led people to adopt limiting and self-denying beliefs about their potential. Nietzsche's concept of the will to power was a radical call to embrace life's challenges and opportunities, not by conforming to the standards of society, but by creating one's own values, one's own language. Nietzsche saw language as a tool that could either liberate or imprison the individual. He understood that words are not neutral, they carry the weight of history, culture, and authority. Language, in his view, can either express the fullness of life or imprison us in a set of static, life-denying beliefs. In fact, Nietzsche believed that much of the suffering we experience in life comes from our adherence to language and concepts that stifle our individual creativity and growth. For Nietzsche, one of the most insidious effects of language is that it teaches us to identify with a fixed self, an identity that, once formed, seems unchangeable. The words you use to describe yourself, your personality, your weaknesses, your strengths are so ingrained in your thinking that they feel like immutable truths. But Nietzsche would argue that this is a trap. Your identity is not a static thing. It is an ongoing, dynamic process, one that language is constantly attempting to freeze in place. Yet, the problem with this fixed sense of self is deeper than Nietzsche's critique. It taps into something more fundamental about how we, as humans, are wired. Psychology shows us that human beings are essentially meaning-making creatures. We don't just exist in the world, we actively interpret it, and we do so through the lens of language. Every experience we have is filtered through the words we've learned, whether we realize it or not. Viktor Frankl, the Austrian psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, understood this truth intimately. In his seminal work, Man's Search for Meaning, Frankl discusses how human beings, even in the most horrific circumstances, cling to meaning as a way to survive. For Frankl, the power of language and, more broadly, the power of narrative was central to his understanding of the human psyche. He saw that our ability to find meaning in suffering, or in any experience, is not just a matter of interpretation, but of language itself. The way we name our pain, our loss, and our fears can either help us transcend them or trap us in a cycle of despair. But the problem doesn't end there. Beyond the individual, we must consider the collective power of language. In Brave New World, Aldous Huxley warned us of a society in which language is manipulated to control the masses. In his dystopian vision, the people are so disconnected from real meaning that they live their entire lives in pursuit of shallow pleasures, their thoughts controlled by slogans and catchy phrases. The concept of freedom becomes utterly hollow, as people are taught that real freedom lies in the consumption of entertainment, in the pursuit of fleeting pleasures, and in the abandonment of meaningful reflection. Huxley's warning is eerily prescient. In our modern society, words have become tools for marketing, for advertising, and for selling lifestyles. The words we hear on TV, in social media, and in everyday conversation shape not just our individual lives, but our collective psyche. We have been taught to define ourselves through consumption, through fleeting images of success and happiness that are continually sold to us through carefully crafted language. We are, in a sense, trapped in a linguistic prison of our own making. But perhaps the most troubling aspect of language's power lies in its ability to obscure reality. The words we use to describe the world often fail to capture the complexity and depth of existence. When we label something as good or bad, we reduce its meaning to a simplistic dichotomy. When we call something normal or abnormal, we create an arbitrary boundary that limits our understanding. The very act of labeling, of naming, simplifies the world in ways that prevent us from fully engaging with it. We are so conditioned to accept the meanings embedded in language that we stop questioning whether those meanings truly capture the essence of the things they describe. Language, then, is not just a tool for describing reality, it is a tool for creating it. And the reality it creates is often one that keeps us trapped in cycles of limitation, self-doubt, and conformity. But here's the ultimate question. If words have this much power, then how much of the reality you live in has been shaped by the language you've learned? How many of your fears, your limitations, and your desires are not truly yours, but are simply the product of words that you've been conditioned to accept? And perhaps most importantly, what would happen if you started to break free from those words? What if you began to question the meanings behind them? What if you redefined your relationship with language itself? The unsettling reality is this. The power of language is not just a theoretical concept, it's something that silently dictates the course of your life. While you go about your day-to-day existence, unaware of the extent to which words influence you, they are shaping your thoughts, emotions, and actions in ways so subtle that it's almost impossible to detect. And the consequences of this silent manipulation are profound. Consider this. How many times have you said something like, "I can't," or "I'm not good enough," or "I'll never succeed"? These simple phrases are not just statements of fact, they are self-fulfilling prophecies. The moment you say these words, you are not only describing your current reality, you are creating your future. In fact, these words, which might seem like innocent expressions of frustration or doubt, are nothing short of cognitive traps. This is because language doesn't just influence what we think, it shapes how we think. Every time you use a limiting word like can't or never, you are reinforcing a mental framework that reduces possibility. You're not just describing a present state of being, you're closing doors to alternatives and pathways that might have been open to you. The mind doesn't just hear the word, it internalizes it as a boundary, and the body follows suit. When you say, "I can't," the subconscious mind goes into a state of learned helplessness, physically and mentally paralyzing you from taking action. This is where the profound and often unnoticed impact of language becomes clear. It's not just a matter of words being true or false, it's about the power those words have to rewire your neural pathways, to reinforce existing beliefs, and to condition your entire body to accept them as fact. When you say something enough, you create a mental habit, a neurological shortcut that operates on autopilot. These habits are powerful, and over time, they build your identity. But the most insidious part of this is that you're not even aware of it. This is where the psychological consequences begin to spiral. The language we use is so deeply embedded in our subconscious that we stop questioning it. Think of all the labels we carry: shy, lazy, disorganized, anxious. These words are not just descriptors, they are diagnoses that we internalize, often without realizing how they limit us. The more we use them, the more we cement them as part of our identity. The concept of cognitive biases, which psychologists like Daniel Kahneman have extensively explored, can help explain how language influences our perception of reality. Cognitive biases are systematic patterns of deviation from norm or rationality in judgment, which often occur because our brains are wired to take mental shortcuts. Language acts as a shortcut for interpreting the world, shaping not only our thoughts but our perceptions. Words like failure or loser create a mental image, a stereotype, that we then project onto ourselves and others. These biases lead us to filter out information that contradicts these labels, thus reinforcing our existing worldview. It's here that we begin to see how language shapes the way we perceive ourselves, but also how we perceive others. Take, for example, the word addict. The moment we label someone as such, we immediately place them into a box, defining them by a singular characteristic. The word becomes a prison, one that locks them into a narrative of shame and limitation. And, in turn, society responds to them as such, treating them as the label, not as a person with the potential to change. We all know that the way people talk about us shapes the way we see ourselves. In the same way, the labels we use to describe others limit their potential. This plays out in much larger, more systemic ways as well. In many cultures, words like failure, weakness, or imperfection carry enormous social stigma, creating a narrative that people must conform to a certain standard of success or achievement to be considered worthy. The fear of being labeled as unsuccessful can push individuals into a constant state of anxiety and self-doubt, driven by the belief that their value is contingent upon external achievements. Ironically, this constant drive for external validation only deepens the inner sense of emptiness, as people internalize the belief that their worth is conditional, defined not by who they are, but by what they achieve or possess. At a societal level, the language of capitalism and consumerism is a masterstroke in creating this condition. Terms like hustle, grind, and rise, and grind have infiltrated our everyday vocabulary, subtly reinforcing the idea that success is only attainable through relentless effort, competition, and accumulation. The very language of our economy dictates how we approach life, as a series of transactions, a relentless chase for more. And this isn't merely an economic process, it's a psychological one. The language of capitalism creates an inner drive that is never satisfied, a constant yearning for more that keeps people chasing something that will always be just out of reach. This leads to a devastating psychological consequence: the loss of true self-awareness. When you are constantly defined by external language, by the words of society, by the labels others put on you, by the definitions of success or worthiness, you lose touch with your inner sense of self. You forget who you truly are, beyond the language that's been imposed upon you. You become a character in a story that was never yours to begin with, caught in a narrative that limits your true potential. Jean-Paul Sartre's existentialist philosophy provides a sobering insight into this phenomenon. He argued that we are condemned to freedom. This means that while we are free to define ourselves, we are also burdened by the weight of that freedom. When we allow ourselves to be defined by external words, labels, and societal expectations, we are relinquishing our responsibility for our own identity. We're allowing others to write the script of our lives. Language, in this sense, becomes a form of bad faith, where we hide behind the words we've been taught to use, rather than confronting the existential reality that we have the power to create ourselves anew. Yet, the consequences of language go even deeper than self-perception and personal identity. Language also shapes the very way we experience emotions. Emotions like anger, sadness, or fear are not universal experiences, they are labeled experiences, filtered through the language we've learned. When we experience these emotions, the words we use to describe them can either intensify or alleviate them. Saying, "I'm angry," can make you feel more locked into the emotion, while saying, "I'm experiencing anger," can create the space to separate the feeling from your identity. This shift in language allows you to observe the emotion rather than be consumed by it, creating room for growth and self-awareness. But the most profound consequence of all may be that the words we use to describe our lives are the very words that lock us in place. The more you say, "I can't," the more you believe it. The more you say, "I'm not good enough," the more you live into that story. The more you allow others to define your worth with their words, the more you lose touch with your true self, the self that exists beyond labels, beyond categories, beyond definitions. But what if you could break free from these patterns? What if you could start using words as tools for liberation rather than imprisonment? The question is not just how language shapes our reality, but how we can reshape our reality by changing the language we use. The consequences of language are undeniable, but there is a way out. But first, we need to understand exactly how we've been trapped. And perhaps, just perhaps, we'll find the key to escape. So here we are, standing at the precipice of a realization that, though unsettling, holds within it the seed of liberation. We've been held captive by our words, the labels, the limiting beliefs, the identity we've been conditioned to accept. They're not truths, they're mere constructions, shackles made of syllables and sounds. But what if we could break free from them? What if we could rewrite the very language we use to describe ourselves and the world around us? The rebellion begins here, in the quiet moment of recognition. You are not your words. To reclaim control over your life, to unshackle yourself from the linguistic prisons that confine you, you must start with one radical shift. Stop identifying with the words you've been taught to use. The first step to breaking free is to recognize that you are not bound by the language of limitation. You are not a failure, nor are you an addict, nor are you the shy, quiet person you've been told you are. These are just labels, words given to you by others, and they don't define the infinite potential within you. This is easier said than done, of course. We live in a world that thrives on labels, labels of success, failure, strength, weakness, identity, and purpose. We are told from a young age that certain words are to be worn as badges of honor or shame. You succeed or fail based on the words attached to your actions and choices. This is why so many people, trapped in a cycle of self-judgment and societal comparison, feel the weight of their limitations every day. They wake up and speak the language of not enough, of too much, of I can't. But here's where the revolution begins. The power to create your reality lies in your ability to redefine your relationship with language. The moment you stop allowing the words you use to define you, you unlock a new level of freedom. You break out of the rigid boxes that society, your family, your peers have placed around you, and you step into the vast unknown of possibility. This shift in perspective isn't just theoretical, it's practical, actionable. To break free from the language that traps you, you must begin with the words you speak to yourself. Begin to pay attention to the words that come out of your mouth, the internal dialogue that constantly runs in the background of your mind. Listen to the stories you've been telling yourself about who you are, about what you can and cannot do, about what is possible and impossible. Take a moment to reflect on your own inner language. How often do you use words like should, never, always, and can't? These words are not just rhetorical tools, they are psychological handcuffs. They limit your possibilities. They close doors before you've even had a chance to open them. But the antidote is simple. Start using language as a tool for empowerment, not limitation. Replace I can't with how can I? Shift from I'm not good enough to what do I need to learn to get better? Instead of I'm a failure, start saying I'm learning from my mistakes. Every time you replace a limiting word with an empowering one, you take a small but significant step toward freedom. These are not just words, they are actions. They are steps toward a new reality. This shift in language doesn't just happen overnight, but with consistency and self-awareness, it begins to rewire your neural pathways. You start to see yourself as capable, as adaptable, as someone who is not confined by external definitions or labels. Instead of seeing yourself as the sum total of your failures, you begin to see yourself as a work in progress, constantly evolving, constantly learning. Yet, there is another layer to this transformation, one that requires a deeper shift. It's not just about changing the words you use, it's about creating a new narrative. You must rewrite the story you've been telling yourself. The stories we tell ourselves about who we are, where we're going, and what we can achieve are the foundation of our reality. If the narrative is limited, if it's filled with doubt and fear, your life will reflect that limitation. If the story is one of possibility, growth, and transformation, then your life will begin to shift toward those outcomes. The philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre spoke extensively about the power of narrative in his concept of existence precedes essence. In other words, we are not born with an inherent, fixed essence. We create ourselves through the choices we make, the actions we take, and the stories we write. Every moment is a chance to create a new chapter. Every word you speak, every action you take, is a brushstroke on the canvas of your life. But here's the most liberating truth. You are the author of your story, no one else. No label, no societal expectation, no external voice can define who you are unless you allow it. The words others use to describe you only hold power if you grant them power. You can choose to step out of the roles that have been imposed on you and create a new narrative, one that reflects who you truly are, not who others want you to be. This shift, however, requires courage. It requires stepping into the unknown, facing the uncomfortable truth that you are fully responsible for the narrative you've been living and that you are the only one who can change it. But that's the price of freedom, the courage to face the unknown and the willingness to take responsibility for your own transformation. Take the example of Viktor Frankl, whose philosophy of meaning under extreme conditions serves as a powerful guide for this kind of inner rebellion. Frankl's experience in Nazi concentration camps showed him the profound truth that no matter how much external circumstance may dictate our conditions, we still have the power to choose how we respond. Even in the darkest of situations, Frankl chose to create his own narrative, to find meaning where none seemed to exist. His ability to redefine his relationship with suffering, to find purpose in the midst of horror, was rooted in his mastery of language. He didn't let the external horrors define him, he defined himself through the words and meaning he chose. What if you, too, could find meaning in the mundane, power in your limitations, and purpose in your struggles? What if you could stop identifying with the words that have kept you small and start creating your own story, a story of resilience, growth, and empowerment? You don't have to be a philosopher or a psychologist to begin this process. You don't need a special degree, a guidebook, or a perfect set of circumstances. All you need is the willingness to question the language that has confined you and the courage to replace it with something new. The rebellion is not about rejecting language altogether, it's about using it to your advantage. It's about taking back the power that has been quietly siphoned away from you. It's about recognizing that you are not a passive observer in your life, but an active creator of your reality. Every word you speak and think is a brushstroke on the canvas of your existence. What kind of masterpiece do you want to create? And so we arrive at the final, most powerful revelation, the one that shifts everything you thought you knew about reality. The words you use to describe your life aren't just words, they are the very fabric of your reality. They don't merely reflect what is, they shape what will be. You may have begun this journey thinking that the problem was your circumstances, your limitations, or the people around you. You might have believed that if only you could change your job, your relationships, or your social status, you would feel free. But the deepest truth has always been this. The change you've been seeking doesn't lie outside of you, it lies in the language you use to speak about your life. This realization, though liberating, is also terrifying. The idea that you are the architect of your reality, that you hold the power to create or destroy your experience through the words you speak, is not just a profound insight, it's a challenge. You can no longer hide behind excuses, behind the "I can't," the "I'm not good enough," the "it's too late." You cannot blame external forces or shift the responsibility to someone else. The moment you accept the truth that language creates reality, you step into a power you cannot unsee. Carl Jung, whose deep exploration of the unconscious mind reshaped modern psychology, understood the profound effect language has on the psyche. For Jung, words were not merely symbols or tools for communication, they were manifestations of deeper psychological forces. When you say something like, "I'm worthless," you aren't simply describing an emotion or a situation. You are projecting a powerful image of your inner state, and your unconscious mind takes it as a directive. It is as if you are giving your subconscious the command to begin constructing a life that matches that self-definition. But the truth Jung spoke of goes even deeper. Our unconscious mind doesn't distinguish between the real and the imagined. The words you speak to yourself and about yourself become self-fulfilling prophecies. When you say, "I'm not good enough," the unconscious begins to filter your experiences through that lens. You become blind to evidence that contradicts this belief. You unconsciously create scenarios that reinforce the narrative that you are, in fact, not good enough. And every time you speak that phrase, you are reaffirming your worthlessness. This is the trap. It's the invisible force that limits our potential, the silent whisper that keeps us from stepping into who we are truly meant to be. But once you realize this, once you understand that your words are not just words, they are constructive forces, you begin to take control of your destiny. You understand that you are the one who writes the script, who chooses the narrative, and who determines the meaning of your life. The most profound realization, however, is this. You have the ability to rewrite that narrative at any moment. Even if you've spent years or decades living under a limiting story, even if you've been trapped by words that others have imposed on you, you still have the power to choose a new one. You can reclaim the authority over your inner language and, in doing so, reclaim the authority over your life. Think about it. What if the way you speak to yourself and about your life today could radically shift tomorrow? What if the simple act of replacing "I can't" with "I will" opened up possibilities you've never even considered? What if instead of "I'm stuck," you started saying "I'm growing" or "I'm evolving"? These aren't just words. They are doorways. They are keys to unlocking a new existence. To truly understand the magnitude of this truth, think about a pivotal moment in history when words created entire movements, altered the course of societies, and changed the collective consciousness. Take Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" speech. Those words didn't just reflect his desires, they planted seeds of possibility in the hearts of millions. They transformed a generation's view of what was possible, giving them the courage to challenge the oppressive systems that held them back. The words, "I have a dream," became a rallying cry, a promise that no matter how entrenched the reality may seem, there is always the potential for change. Or consider the words of Viktor Frankl, who, even in the most unimaginable suffering, spoke of finding meaning in life. He wrote, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." These words, spoken in the midst of a concentration camp, had the power to transcend the horrors of the moment and offer a new framework for human dignity. Frankl's words didn't just describe his experience, they transcended it, providing a universal truth about the human spirit. No external force has the power to destroy your inner freedom. The ultimate realization is this: words create. They create our reality, they create our relationships, they create the world in which we live. Words are not simply a reflection of what is, they are the architects of what is to come. Every time you speak, think, or write, you are laying down the foundation of the world that will manifest. But here's the paradox. You may feel powerless because of the language you've been conditioned to use, but the power to change it is already in your hands. This is the most profound freedom. It's not freedom from external forces, not freedom from your circumstances, not freedom from your past mistakes. It's freedom from the language that has kept you enslaved. It's freedom from the inner stories that hold you back, that trap you in cycles of despair and defeat. By consciously choosing a new language, one that empowers, one that celebrates growth, one that accepts the full spectrum of your humanity, you create a new reality. You begin to see yourself as capable, as adaptable, as infinitely resourceful. You stop identifying with labels that limit you, and instead, you start crafting the narrative that reflects your true potential. The greatest truth that language offers is this: you can start fresh at any moment. No matter where you are right now, no matter what labels you've attached to your life, you can choose a new set of words. You can write a new chapter. The power has always been within you, waiting for you to awaken to it. Imagine waking up tomorrow and speaking in a way that opens doors instead of closing them. Imagine declaring, "I am worthy of my dreams," or "I am capable of profound change." Imagine using words as tools to build a life that feels authentic and aligned with your deepest values. You are not just changing the words, you are changing the very fabric of your existence. And that, perhaps, is the most radical realization of all. The ultimate power you hold in your hands is the ability to redefine your reality, one word at a time. So, let this be your challenge. Speak a new truth into existence. The language you use today will shape your tomorrow. Choose it wisely. The journey to reclaim your reality through language has only just begun. As you step into this power, ask yourself, what will you create with your words? The story is yours to write,